guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Now let us begin session 2 of the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. And the second session will be held under the theme of New Emerging Donors, Changing Landscape, which will be moderated by Professor Kim Tae-kyun, Professor of International Development at the Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul National University. So now let me hand over the microphone to our honorable moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Kim with a big round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Welcome back to second session and our topic, emerging donors and changing landscape of international development. As well known, there are many symptoms like the changing mechanism of global governance, especially the COVID-19, the pandemic, and also, war in Ukraine. I think the degenerated some of the pricing mechanism of food and energy, and also global supply chain in a distorted, very severe manner. And also we can see witness some of the multiple crises, including the food security, and climate change, and refugee, and so on. So, in that context, what kind of solution we can prepare from the perspective of the global governance and international developments? The first session, we just touched on some Korean perspective, or the Korean in the model of, from the recipient to a donor. And now, to the second session, we'll touch on some of the global perspective to deal with those kind of multiple crises and some of the solutions we can think of. And also, finally, I have to mention some of the geopolitical situation, like the so-called U.S.-China strategic competition, or Indo-Pacific strategy versus like China BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. So the many things, the many factors we have to consider to talk about what could be our possible scenario to overcome some the massive like the crisis in multiple the format. Okay, before I start at the second session, I'm going to give some the guiding like the direction of the discussion. Probably the 5 I can select. The first one, how to enhance the effectiveness and accountability of South-South and triangular cooperation. So if we have chance to talk this issue, I think we can have some of the wisdom to be shared for how to enhance the development effectiveness and as well as accountability for the SSDC. And second, knowledge sharing between the traditional and emerging donors. So emerging and traditional donors, they have their own wisdom and the knowledge and experiences as best practices. So we have to exchange, we have to share different level of knowledge, across different countries. Especially emerging donors. And third one, some synergy effects between the profit organization and private sector and developmental agencies to scale up the financial resources. So everyone knows we have the SDG Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, but we have very serious problem. That's the lack of funding, lack of financial resources. So how we can scale up the increase through the cooperation between emerging donors and traditional donors. And then the fourth one, how to coordinate the global challenge. I think there was the needs and demands of the country level. So countries is suffering from the different level, different formats of difficulties during the multiple crises. And also we just suggest some kind of proposal of the global level, global governance. So there are some kind of big gaps between the global level and the domestic level. So how we can coordinate, how we can narrow it down, the gap between two. I think the finally integrated approach. So we slightly touch on the first session, the HDP nexus, as one of the key example of the integrated approach. So we have to consider altogether peace, development, and humanity, and other climate change or other issues. So how can they put together into one single box in the name of the integrated approach? So all 5 the issues, I just suggested 2 or 3 presenters. And then I'm going to introduce one by one the very distinguished speakers today for the second session. The first speaker Stefan Clearby. Dr. Clearby is head of the research program, Inter and Transitional Cooperation at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, IDOS, formerly the German Development Institute in Bonn, in Germany. And actually, he was the director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. So I'm so happy to have you again in Korea. So he will talk about some of the big issue, the global challenge and then development cooperation. And the second speaker, Dr. Xiaojun Grace Wang. She is now the Deputy Director of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation in New York. And also she will deliver today virtually on behalf of the Director of the UN OSSE. And then the third speaker, her name is quite difficult to pronounce, but I'll try. Raghaidru Elin Arunadottir. Is it okay? Very good. All right, in short, Raga. So Raga is the director of the OECD Development Center and a former Minister of Industry and Commerce in Iceland. So she will also talk about some of the perspective from the, I think, OECD stance. Okay, without further ado, I will invite the first speaker, Stefan. But one thing, like I'm going to give the 15 minutes to each speaker, and then each speaker, you can take off your mask when you present, right? But after presentation, please put your mask back on. All right, so without further ado, let me invite the first speaker. The floor is yours, Stefan.
Okay, it's working. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Kim, moderator, and thank you so much, Professor Sohn, President Sohn, and also to MOFA, Director General Won, and for this kind invitation. It's really great to be back in Seoul, in Korea. I benefited a lot from my 2-year stay here, and really great to see also a number of former colleagues. What I'm saying to you is just in my personal capacity, in my academic capacity, so it might even touch some sensitive topics, so it's just my own person. Development cooperation, global dynamics, and way forward. Let me just present to you 3 main points. My first one is about fundamental changes as a context for global development cooperation. And I think it was already mentioned several times. In my reading, I would say we are dealing with a paradox. On the one hand, we have a huge need for global cooperation, even more cooperation, I would even say collaboration, multiple crisis situations. I'm not going to spell everything out. We mentioned it already. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, little capacity to deal with those challenges. And let me just mention few illustrations in this regard. I think what we saw over the last couple of years already is a more tense international relationship situation, looking at the situation how the West, if you want to call it like this, and the relationship to China is looking like. I think we can see it, the situation with Russia, Russia's aggression in Ukraine, etc. So much more tense situation. Sinning of multilateralism. Looking back, I think 2015 was really a very open window of opportunity. We agreed on the Paris Agreement. We agreed on the 2030 agenda. Would it be possible to achieve something like this today? I doubt. We have, of course, international fora from UN, OECD, G20, etc. But that would be also quite important discussion. I think especially United Nations are suffering from this kind of situation we are having, and we could go to details in this regard. To some extent, I would say some like-minded global governance clubs might benefit. G20 is probably not benefiting. I think we see it every day, but some other clubs like G7, etc. So 2 main guiding questions are coming out of this for me. how to find a strategic approach in times of permanent crisis. I think crisis means always immediate reaction, and what we need is a more strategic approach. And the second one, how to manage the dominance of the geopolitical confrontation. This leads me to my next slide. Yes, a bit more breaking it down, what might those dynamics mean for the development cooperation system. First of all, and I think we had a number of great illustrations in this regard, Hao Liang-Chu and others, the pressing needs in developing countries because of those crisis situations, pandemic, a main driver in this regard, but also the war in the Ukraine. UNDP did some very interesting analysis on this. The crisis, the war in the Ukraine is much more severe for developing countries than the pandemic, just to mention it. This is, and I think we shouldn't overlook it, leading in a number of countries to a situation of instability and political decay, quite often going hand in hand with poor governance. I mean, looking at some countries like Sri Lanka, I think this is something what we should worry about, that this crisis situation is leading to political decay in many countries. We have overall less momentum for the 2030 agenda and its SDGs. I think we would love all to see more momentum, but reality is different. We have a strong search for new development paradigms. Yeah? And I think this conference is a great place to have this kind of discussion. Just to give you some illustrations, as you probably know, China's President Xi announced last year the Global Development Initiative in parallel to the Belt and Road Initiative. This is something what he was trying to emphasize to support UN efforts, but it's a new development paradigm. We have, as you might know, from the European Union, the Global Gateway Initiative announced December last year with quite relevant amount of money, 300 billion euro for physical infrastructure. This is quite a move for the European Union. We have some other debates like the global public investment debate and some others. So what I want to say is this is a very important debate, also very much related to South-South and triangular cooperation discussions, because at least to some extent, this is not just let's sit together and look for the best way how to think about development, but it's also about competition. It's very much, and that's quite the new context about competition. I would assume that we are going to see much more budget constraints for ODA in the near future. I think until last year, 21, numbers were going up, at least to some extent. We have some specific COVID elements related to it. We have also some specific elements like in-donor refugee costs, etc., etc. But what I would assume in many DAC countries is really that ODA budget situation will become quite serious one. Yeah? And this is not to call for it, but in a way we need to be prepared. Yeah? We have this kind of continued changing role and relevance of ODA, graduation of country. I think we mentioned already many times, Korea graduated from the group of developing countries, but this is also taking place with regard to other countries. Yeah? Just think about Costa Rica, Chile, a number of other countries. So the group of eligible countries, ODA eligible countries, is going to decrease further, and we have decreasing aid dependency. This is good news to a large extent. At the same time, as ODA actors, we also need to think about it. What are implications? Just to continue with what those global dynamics mean for development cooperation, I think we all know that measurement of what we are doing is always important. We have this nice ODA objective or goal, 0.7 percent of our GDP to provide it for ODA. So what we are measuring is always important. You might be aware that the DAC implemented what is called Oda modernization over the last couple of years. So I would say this kind of how to keep a high level of credibility and transparency of reporting is something what is important. What is important in this context is, and this is also based to a large extent to the Busan High-Level Meeting 2011, that we saw a couple of efforts over the last couple of years to make also South-South cooperation more transparent and to take it into account. And OECD came up with a new instrument called TOSD, Total Official Support for Sustainable Development. This is now an initiative not only by OECD, but also by the United Nations. And it has more credibility because it's now a joint activity. And this activity is something what is potentially important because it could include some additional aspects like other contributions to global public goods, some international climate finance elements which are not always part of ODA, but also South-South cooperation contributions. And that might be something what is highly relevant. I would only also want to mention here, and I think this is underestimated when it comes to the dimension, international climate finance obligations. We have, based on the COP in Copenhagen 29, an international obligation that high-income countries provide at least $100 billion per year for international climate finance for developing countries. This was not yet achieved, but what is important is we have an increasing overlap between ODA resources and international climate finance. And my assumption is international climate finance will be maybe the main driver, at least one main driver, of future of ODA. Just to give you one example, in Germany, 85% of Germany's international climate finance is ODA budget. Yeah? So this is something, and Republic of Korea is a very specific case, would love to discuss this more in detail, but international climate finance, ODA, a very important overlap. Role and views on South-South cooperation. I think we can also, I can provide more insights on this in the roundtable discussion later on. We still have a very limited dialogue between Southern and Northern providers. This is very clear. BAPA plus 40 in 2019 was not really successful in this regard. I think international community was able to bring together the Southern providers. Northern providers were not so much interested. We have a quite changing perspective on South-South cooperation. China is the main and outstanding provider. I think just looking back 15 years ago, international community was asking China to do more. Now the Belt and Road Initiative is looked at in a quite different way. Yeah? We have other South-South cooperation providers. I think it's great to see so many representatives here from Thailand, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, etc. This is great. I could even add more, like Rwanda. There's also a good collaboration between Korean institutions and the Rwandan South-South cooperation institutions. So even some least developed countries like Rwanda are aid providers. And we have also from the African Union, the development agency, the former NEPAD. So that's also quite something what we need to take into account. Last but not least, my last point here is decreasing momentum for aid and development effectiveness agenda. I think this is not really spelled out by the actors involved, but I think this is reality, that because of the bigger geostrategic context, we have less momentum for this debate, and I think Korea can really be a main driver to push this debate, to look what is the future discussion in this regard and how Korea can facilitate. Let me just quickly go to some takeaways or way ahead. What does it mean? I think this changing narrative discussion is something what is highly relevant. We have different contributions in this regard. I think also to mention that the OECD vision from last year is asking to renew the OECD approach on development. I think so that's an overall consensus, and I would see this conference here today as really one important element in this regard. We need to manage the conceptual relationship between ODA and international climate finance. I try to explain why I really think this is something what is important. OECD is doing some analytical work, but this is not accepted by everybody, including some main South-South cooperation providers. But we really need to find a way how to introduce a more credible international climate finance reporting system. A few other aspects, we need to provide some more attention to a couple of elements like strategic foresight. I mean, dealing with a more tense geopolitical system we need to have a better understanding. Strategic foresight is something what might be helpful in this regard. I mentioned already, we need to have a reflection on what does aid and development effectiveness mean for a new context, and I would also love to look at some policy reform elements in this regard. I mean, if we think about more on climate change, geostrategic implications, etc., we need to find better ways how to coordinate policies. Last but not least, some institutional and partnerships aspects. Let me just pick out a few. I think the question or the search for strategic dialogue and partnerships and networks is something what is crucial. On my way here to Korea, I spent the last weekend in Delhi, India. There was what is called Delhi process. It was Delhi process 6. It's blinking. And this Delhi process is something what is led by some think tanks in India together with NEST, the network of southern think tanks. Some of those think tanks are closer to some governments, some are more, some reservations. But what is important is this kind of discussion, how those actors are looking at the global context and looking at South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. And I think what we need is really to have more of those rather informal platforms for dialogue. In how far are Southern providers really interested to come up with a consensus? I mean, this is not really given. It would be also great to see that, let's say, those South-South cooperation providers which are not part of the BRICS group, how do you form a position? What is your interest? How do you bring those interests to global debates? I think that would be something what is very important. So strategic dialogue, partnerships, networks, this is something where I really think we should, as DAC providers, DAC actors, do much more. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you again. Dr. Stefan Spirit. Yeah, so he just touched on, I think, various aspects of the current situation, global dynamics, and then the way forward. So task ahead, what kind of task ahead we have to take into account very seriously. I think the couple of the points I would like to give some more highlights. The first one, I think the club governance. So very important, I think the role we can see, so the G7, the G20, and other, kind of the platform, regional platforms as well. And then he highlighted also the conceptual relationship between the ODA and international climate change finance. So this is, I think, the hard issue in international community. So how we can finance for climate change preparation. And then finally, the GPEDC and then aid or development effectiveness. So we have to give more reflection of GPEDC, on the new changing the dynamics. So all in all, it's a very insightful presentation as the first speaker. So on the basis of what he presented, and then we can develop further by inviting the second and third speakers. So now we're gonna turn to second speaker, so Dr. Wang. So Dr. Wang will give her presentation virtually. Yeah. So if you're ready, just go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kim. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to join you today at the 15th Seoul ODA conference on behalf of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. With sincere thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and COICA for inviting me. It is such a pleasure to dialogue with old friends and new friends, and with Stefan and Rada and Professor King on this very important subject. I'm sorry I can't come to Seoul today because we are also busy preparing the Global South-South Development Expo, which is to take place just in 2 weeks' time, 12th to 14th September in Bangkok. It's a hybrid mode. Welcome you all to join as well, online or in person. We are talking about the development landscape changing. Yes, indeed, it has been changing very fast during the past 2 decades, especially after the economic crisis 2008. However, I think no one here would have anticipated the speed and scale of change that has happened during the past 3 years. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed the biggest ever systemic challenge to international development cooperation. The alarming gap among countries and communities, the deepened poverty and widening divide in societies, insufficient action responding to climate change, the war, conflicts. I think these can at times shatter our belief in the meaning of humanity and solidarity. So in a way, I do share some of the descriptions the moderator, Professor Kim and Stefan, you just described as the backdrop of today's discussion with a very heavy heart. Yet, I think as development practitioners, we are born to be hopeful and always search for rays of hope that can guide us to break through together rather than break down apart. So I see the discussion today is to search for light on a foggy and weary voyage ahead. One beam of light in development cooperation must still come from the potential to continue increasing ODA. I know there's budget constraints and there's anticipation this is dropping. In real terms, we see ODA rose to an all-time high of $161 billion in 2020, and then rise again to $179 billion in 2021. However, we also know this is associated with the increase in the form of loans. So in 2020, ODA in bilateral sovereign loans surged by 38.7%, while the total ODA grew only by 3.5%. Overall, ODA remained at 0.33% of DAC member countries' combined GNI, far from the international commitment of 0.7%. While 23 DAC members increased their ODA, some cut significantly because of the impact of the pandemic or because of their shifting priorities in their national policies. So many see that this beam of light for development cooperation is dimming. Yes, it is, but we can't let the wind of change blow it off. So ODA continues to be crucial for developing countries, especially the least developed countries, in fighting devastating poverty. So global advocacy, I think, should continue campaigning for fulfillment of ODA commitment. And we all know it is certain that ODA alone cannot meet the rising demands to recover from the pandemic or to achieve SDGs. We have to also search the lives beyond through a renewed inclusive global partnership for rays of hope. Within this context, we talked about South-South and triangular cooperation. I think, yes, it has proven to be an important complement to the ODA and has made timely and impactful contributions, especially during the response to the pandemic. We know that at the early times of the pandemic, when all hands were tied to responding to the crisis domestically, much needed medical supplies have arrived from the global south to other developing countries. Stronger mobilization of funds, technologies, capacities for recovery is surging through South-South cooperation, and in some cases, it's Source-North cooperation as well. India, China, Cuba, and others have been sending medical experts, providing medical supplies to both developing and developed countries. Vaccine production cooperation among developing countries is very important. It will boost long-term productive capacity and resilience in the global south and globally. So these South-South and triangular cooperation initiatives also have enabled inclusive partnership with active engagement of private sector and CSOs. The Southern-led development banks, financial institutions are also in action. We know the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank making available over 10 billion at the early stage of the pandemic to help its member states to alleviate health pressure. BRICS new development bank also allocate about 15 million to its member countries to help rebuild economies. Triangular cooperation is also gaining momentum, where countries can access shared insights on development issues with diversified knowledge, experiences, and resources from both developing and developed countries. In triangular cooperation, we know traditional donors such as Japan and Germany have been strong partners, but emerging aid providers can play important roles in advancing triangular cooperation, building on their comparatively recent experiences and developing solutions that can be more easily adaptable to other developing contexts. Republic of Korea, in this regard, also has been a champion in recent years. So the dynamic of South-South and triangular cooperation is promising to demonstrate a paradigm shift of a one-way donor-recipient relationship to a model of international cooperation that rooted in mutual interest, not shying away from that. It's not charity, it's mutual interest, shared experiences, and multilateral responses. At the center of this changing landscape stand the emerging economies, who can provide additional and alternative approaches of working together in a deeply challenged world today. So let me outline just 3 areas where the emerging economies can be most impactful through South-South and triangular cooperation. The first area is scaling up financial resources. Over the past decade, we have seen expansion of new Southern-led development financial institutions, credit programs, special funds. As of 2022, there are more than 250 national development banks in the global south, and those banks have doubled the amount of long-term finance available for developing countries. Grants funds with a clear focus of South-South cooperation are also mushrooming. At the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, we are also entrusted by member states to manage those funds, including, for example, UN Trust Fund for South-South Cooperation, India, Brazil, South Africa IPSA Fund, India UN Partnership Fund, G77 and China Perez Guerrero Trust Fund. Countries like Brazil, China, Colombia, India, Qatar, Republic of Korea, South Africa, UAE, they have all provided much needed financial resources to Southern-led sustainable development projects. And many of those projects are in collaboration with UN agencies as well. So we can find more of such funds mushrooming in the countries not managed by the UN system or managed by different parts of UN system. So I think it's not just the availability of those funds in terms of financial resources, but also more important is the ability of those southern players to bring relevant knowledge and tested solutions while providing finance to most promising areas of economic transformation in other developing countries. And the second area we can be most impactful is knowledge sharing and technology exchanges. That's the bread and butter of South-South cooperation. That, I think, we have talked about the first session. I listened to part of it, how to more efficiently connect solutions with the supply and demand side of development solutions. I think we can really leverage digital technology to make the South-South cooperation less manual, less about shaking hands among heads of states, but rather more organically from all institutions around the world. At UN Office for South-South Cooperation, we have South-South Galaxy as a platform for knowledge sharing and instant connecting of partners powered by machine learning. And that has already over 500 institutions actively engaging, sharing their solutions. Emerging economies are particularly important in this because the emerging economies are leading in innovation and technology, and this includes cooperation in sharing vaccination technology for production, innovation in tech commuting solutions, the use of artificial intelligence, the expansion of e-commerce and use of telemedicine, digital finance, you name it. So all this are very promising to boost the development economy of the developing countries. Anchored on shared experience, proven solutions, and experimental learning, co-creation, knowledge-based cooperation can really bring transformative capacity and lasting impact. The third area, more effective, networked, and inclusive multilateralism. In the UN SG's report to our common future, the SG also pointed out that humanity's welfare, indeed very future, depend on solidarity and working together as a global family to achieve common goals. We know that many drivers, as mentioned by some of you, including geostrategic ones, might have associated with countries' agreed cooperation packages, yet the foundation for mutual support between developing countries is still the spirit of solidarity, and a catalyst is mutual benefits. In recent years, we also see developing countries more and more leverage multilateralism to balance diversified interests and to enhance the impact of their cooperation at sub-regional, regional, and global level. At sub-regional level, let me give you an example. Ministry of Science and ICT in Republic of Korea work with our office in partnership with Mekong River Commission Secretariat and Mekong Institute, lead a triangular cooperation project on sustainable development in lower Mekong River Basin. 5 years, this project enlists the capacities or expertise from Korean institutions and specialized UN agencies to strengthen access to water, food, and energy for vulnerable communities in 5 countries: Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, So all this is not country to country. It's through sub-regional mechanism like the Mekong River Commission, a multilateral arrangement. We also know with globalization meets unprecedented challenges, regional integration is offering a promising platform. We know the Africa free trade areas, and in their development, they are also drawing inspiration from how ASEAN and Mercosur in Latin America manage common markets. BRICS Summit and BRICS Plus platform is another promising platform for broadening and strengthening participation of emerging markets. G20 presidency, we also heard you mention that. I think the G20 presidency of Indonesia also aims to push for more democratic and representative international cooperation. Yes, those lights may, be questioned sometimes, but coming together will be a strong ray of hope. So at the end, let me just quickly conclude. I think since I come from United Nations, let me quote the UNSG again. He highlighted now it is the time for a stronger, more networked and inclusive multilateral system anchored with the United Nations. our office is mandated to support cooperation. Sometimes I really feel very proud. No matter how challenging it is, cooperation is the key. So we continue to support, to work with developing countries and developed countries with the whole UN system to provide support to South-South and triangular cooperation. We have UN system-wide strategy on this, and it is being implemented. And our global knowledge sharing platform, going beyond knowledge sharing to connect partner, now really have 5,000 organizations, and we're going to launch a new volume of good practices that they shared, and that will add up to about 1,000 solutions across our SDGs. So in our journey ahead, we can see there is still a ray of hope coming from various development cooperation modalities, including one that is quite promising from South-South and triangular cooperation approach. Especially, it is building a bridge connecting developing countries and developed countries. So through the triangular partnership, and is inclusively engaging civil society and private sector as well. Only by bringing this kind of global partnership, we can recover from this pandemic stronger and together. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to more dialogue with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate, even though you're now in New York. So the Grace Wang just presented a very important element of now development the landscape. That's the South-South and triangular cooperation, and also highlight the most impact the South-South and triangular cooperation provides. The 3 points. The first one, the financial resources. And second is knowledge sharing for the solution. And finally, effective networking for multilateralism. So all 3, the elements is so important to recognize the importance of, South-South and triangular cooperation to complement ODA and other sources of the financing. Okay, and then we have the third speaker, as I said, Raga from the OECD. So she will also have 15 minutes to elaborate what she prepared for the global dynamics and the changing landscape and the emerging donors. So Raga, you have the 15 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and more thanks are in order. I want to thank KOICA and the Foreign Ministry of the Republic of Korea for the invitation and congratulate you on this impressive and excellent event. It's an honor for me to share the stage with such distinguished speakers, Stefan and Grace. It's always a challenge to be the last one because a lot of the things that I had prepared has already been said, so I will be quoting you in my intervention. I come from the OECD Development Center, and I will tell you a little bit about that here in my presentation. But what I think is both from the first session and now in the second session, it is to me very interesting and gratifying, if I can use that word, to see and witness the common thread in all of the interventions. We are all talking and emphasizing the need for more international cooperation, and my intervention is not going to divert from that message. And as has been discussed, the economic center of gravity in the world has shifted. If we only look over the last 2 decades actually, the economic center of gravity has shifted dramatically. Between 2000 and 2019, the share of emerging markets in the global trade increased from 32% to 46%. And their share as recipients of global foreign direct investment increased from 15% to 46% as well. And today, more than half of the world's GDP comes from, or GDP growth occurs in those markets. So that is a significant shift. And the global development landscape is challenging. Despite all of this, we have these successes that I discussed, but the landscape continues to be challenging, and we have heard everyone talk about the effects of COVID-19, and that effect will be long felt. We can all be sure of that. And today we face the challenges of similar or even greater magnitude at the time of when the Development Center was founded 60 years ago. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary this year, and the challenges are even greater now than they were 60 years ago. And sadly, they include the return of war, growing hunger and inflation, compounded by the challenge of climate change, which hasn't stopped despite pandemics and Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. A little bit about the Development Center. We heard from our Secretary General of the OECD this morning in the opening segment. The Development Center is a part of the OECD, a special part though, because what makes us special is our membership. We have 53 members, 25 OECD countries and 28 non-OECD members, and it's a place where countries of all income level, and this was the message of, you see on the slide a picture of John F. Kennedy. He is the initiator of the Development Center, made a speech in the Parliament of Canada in Ottawa in 1961, where he suggested that countries of the developed and developing world of all income levels would come together to discuss policy and development issues on equal footing. And this is where, this is what we do. We bring countries together. We're a safe space for dialogue, and we are a part of the OECD, so we are a part of the multilateral system and benefit from the experience and the expertise that we have within the OECD. We therefore provide a space where our members can address policy issues and problems, again, on equal footing. And in order for this all to work, we need an inclusive and multi-stakeholder partnerships to tackle the complex global challenges, such as the green transition, the digital transition. And how do we do that? And this has been the topic of discussion here this morning. We do this, for example, by learning from successes and failures of past and existing global partnerships. We do it by integrating all relevant perspectives to expand our knowledge and to innovate. Innovation is a key word and very close to my heart. We do it by ensuring a more coordinated approach between global challenges and meeting the country level needs. This has to go together. And by finding synergies between traditional and emerging donor-funded projects and interests. We have good examples, and we have to learn from innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships. Grace mentioned the Kovacs Initiative, and that is a prime example of innovative multi-stakeholder partnership, the Kovacs Initiative. It was rapidly established in April 2020 as a part of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, the ACT by Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, and the WHO. And it quickly mobilized resources from government and philanthropic sources to stimulate R&D and facilitated large-scale vaccine procurement and distribution in the process. And the initiative delivered its first dose of vaccines to Ghana on February 24th, 2021. less than 3 months after the UK became the first country in the world to start a mass vaccination campaign. And it reached 100 countries with vaccine doses within 42 days, many of which would not otherwise have gained access to vaccines. However, as in most everything in life, Kovacs has also been criticized for various reasons. For instance, for that it was not successful in preventing what we could phrase as vaccine nationalism, and it gave also substantial power to pharmaceutical companies, which boosted their profits by keeping vaccine supply limited. These are things that we can learn from. These are things that we should not have hinder increasing cooperation and projects such as this one. It was, despite everything, the first global alliance on such scale, such large scale, and there's much to learn from its success and failures in establishing a more effective and inclusive partnership to address other global challenges, because as we have been discussing, there are enough global challenges to go around for us to be innovative in thinking. And speaking of challenges, the green transition is the next big challenge and has been. And that's where we have to apply our learning and our innovation. And let me start with the hard facts. Let me start with the money. We'll need to find money because investments in energy are costly. An investment in renewable energy often carry higher upfront investment costs in return for much lower operating costs later. And I can, in the discussion, elaborate on that with an example from my country, Iceland, from decades ago. But in fact, our sister organization at the OECD, the International Energy Agency, already today has estimated that private finance today accounts for nearly half of energy investments in emerging markets and developing economies. So it's very important, but nevertheless, when we look at clean energy, more specifically, we find that, and developing market, excluding China, have contributed only around 10% of the global issuance of clean energy-related debt. So what can be the way forward? Can we find ideas for unlocking more investment into clean energy everywhere in the world? Can we learn from emerging donors and innovative practices like impact funds to invest in businesses and markets which have previously been overlooked and yet have the potential to unlock major transformative growth? These are the questions that we need to be asking. And the costs and the trade-offs, meanwhile, of the green transition, they are becoming clearer and must be managed to ensure equitable outcome within and across countries. Fossil fuels still dominate energy sources across the world, including in OECD countries, and emission-intensive economic activities continue to matter for growth and employment. That's the fact of life. The scope of the transformation will affect the whole spectrum of public policies beyond energy and environment. Its magnitude will require collective action by governments, central banks, firms, investors, and households to correct prevailing market failures. And at the Development Center, we are working to keep strengthening our facilitating role in this area. And to give you a quick example, to support developing countries' energy transitions, we will be launching at the COP27 in Egypt in November our framework for extracted-based economies in transition. Acronym is very, very descriptive, EFFECT, easy to remember. And it's a one-stop shop where OECD and partner producing countries, industry stakeholders, international organizations and civil society can all work together to develop shared approaches for actionable, collaborative solutions to implementing carbon transition strategies. And as I said, we'll be looking forward to introducing this framework at the COP. And just finally, the development challenges that we are facing, they are so vast, they are so complex, they're so interconnected, then they cannot be solved by anyone, anywhere, alone. And this is what the foreign minister from Korea this morning emphasized in his intervention, and I couldn't agree more. The international community simply needs to find innovative ways of organizing to enable synergies between the development projects sponsored by traditional donors, by ODA measurable institutions or projects, to find the synergies between those and the projects enabled by emerging donors. In other words, we need partnerships to find the right combination of investments in building processes and capacity for sustainable solutions with quick action to fill the pressing infrastructure gaps. And at a time when hundreds of millions of people have plunged into poverty during the pandemic, and at the same time donor aid budgets are increasingly being squeezed, that's the reality of life. We can't spend the same dollar, the same euro twice. So this is the reality, and we need a more coordinated approach to tackle both poverty and global challenges in country at the same time. So bringing together experts is one way. We need to start to focus on knowledge sharing and shared diagnostics by all of our partners, and share, focus on the most pressing development challenges. And at the Development Center, we, for instance, have our multidimensional country reviews that take exactly this, the holistic view of development, and form the basis for a mutual learning meetings between all of our members and beyond. We have policy dialogues. We have policy dialogues on global value chains or migration, bringing together experts, policymakers from both advanced and developing economies to learn from and learn with each other and cooperate. And this is, just finally, we need to create incentives for profit-seeking companies to engage in development, or to put it differently, for profit and development initiatives or incentives to coincide. And that needs to be found, because we need to partner up there as everywhere else. And at the Development Center, we have our Emerging Markets Networks, MNET, which does exactly that, brings together the private sector, the multinational corporation, and OECD experts. So finally, we will continue to do this. The main message from me, as I started off by saying, echoing what other people have been saying, we need to make sure that the multilateral system rises up to its challenge, and we need to focus our attention and strengthen the international cooperation in an innovative way to make sure that we can fight all of these challenges at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anuranga. So she just explained the key role of Development Center OECD by mentioning inclusive stakeholder partnership and private investment and green transition, and also synergies between the traditional and emerging donors. So thank you again. So now we are heading towards Q&A session. So I think that why don't we have the 2 rounds of the Q&A, I mean the question and the answer. So the first round, I'm going to give 1 question to each speaker, and then I'm going to select the the question from the chatting box, and then I'm going to give it to each speaker. Right. So the very quick question to Stefan first. You just mentioned the important role of the club, like the G7. So G7 this year launched like so-called PGII, Partnership for Global Investment, Infrastructure Investment. And also China has another big like the plan, that's the BRI, to support the provide infrastructure. So do you think that the PGII and BRI, those 2 different initiatives could be collaborated with each other or contested? So I'm going to see your own view. And the second question given to the Grace Wang. Do you think that the South-South cooperation should be formalized like a traditional donor? If you agree with that, what kind of the solution method you can use for the formalized SSC? And then the last one given to Diraga. So your center, the development center, so you just mentioned and then emphasized the role of one of the center key roles. That is to coordinate the global challenge with the local demand of different countries. So the poverty reduction or the corona pandemic, the impact of the corona pandemic is quite differentiated with what kind of country. So could you elaborate furthermore some of the details, the coordination mechanism between the global challenge and then local demand? So yeah, Stefan, you go.
Just briefly, from my understanding, we need to have a good understanding how China is organizing its South-South cooperation approach. Everybody is interested. Belt and Road Initiative, from my perspective, is a physical infrastructure approach of China, mainly coordinated by Ministry of Commerce. GDI is, from my understanding, a bit different. It's not so much about investments and infrastructure. It's rather, let's say, the development paradigm. And so far I know it's also rather related to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it might also, bring in something in addition. So my understanding is this is a parallel approach. Yeah, GDI plus BRI. That's also quite important for us to understand. I think looking at other global actors, we have similar approaches. We have those investment approaches in the United States, building back a better world. Is very much also an infrastructure approach. What I mentioned already, European Union with the Global Gateway, yes. Also infrastructure. G7 is trying to coordinate this to some extent. If you look at the outcome document of the last G7 summit, you will find some of those initiatives. And at the same time, and I think this is really something what is always important, the narrative part. Yeah, and we are all struggling with this. Just looking at the justification of development cooperation, this is changing. I think what we have heard from the United States, where this kind of security dimension is always much more pronounced, and in other countries it's one way. But what we are seeing is that everybody is struggling to some extent. Also, this call from the OECD ministerial meeting last year, we need to have a new paradigm. I think this is really a call. This is different. We can't just continue. I don't have a response for this, but what is important to see that those activities are more or less in parallel. What is difficult, do we have common ground for this? Looking at some ongoing discussions, I would think we need to find out. G20 is probably a quite important step. Indonesia, is organizing this for 22. This will be a special challenge, as we all know. Last weekend, what I mentioned already, in Delhi, India is preparing for 23. South Africa is coming next, and Brazil in 2025. So at least to some extent, 1,000 actors are trying to bring those years together to think about, can we make it an approach to think about a joint development paradigm? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And then Grace, are you there? Yeah, I think that you have 2 minutes to answer the question.
Okay, it's a big question though. Thank you very much. I think the question is about whether I think South-South cooperation should be formalized or I guess in a current organic way. So my answer is that I think there is advantage of formalizing some dimensions of cooperation, but that formalization has to leave space for organic growth of this cooperation, for innovation. Let me give an example. In recent years, we have seen more and more institutionalization of South-South cooperation. Developing countries are setting up their institutions to coordinate and formalize South-South cooperation. This is a trend. However, different countries have different contexts and make different choices. For example, in some countries, they set up a development cooperation agency. And like the traditional donors, a separate agency or a part of their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And some countries maybe separate those functions into different ministries and set up a coordination mechanism across ministries. And other countries may set up their own trust fund for South-South cooperation, but a different country may decide not to do so, but rather partner with United Nations to have a large-scale trust fund for South-South cooperation. So there are various approaches, and sometimes that is the strength of South-South cooperation. You can't put one straitjacket to that. And triangular cooperation is also being explored of what's the most suitable. Since I only have 2 minutes, let me just summarize this. We all know that we have the big ocean, and all rivers and streams goes to the ocean. The ocean is our shared future, it's sustainable development vision. You can formalize and make sure trying to have standards about green and clear water from the rivers, but you cannot regularize the size, the route, the pathway of rivers. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'm sorry, so sorry, I can't give you enough time to make your answer. So, and then Raga, also you have 2 minutes.
Yes, I will be quick and give you 2 concrete examples. Okay. The question was about how can we coordinate the global and the local.
Yeah.
And first, we have a global challenge, which is the climate challenge. And at the same time, we have a challenge of increasing growth and development in part of the world. But what we are saying, who come from the developed world, we are saying, yes, you need, and we will help you, and we will have the international system assist you in developing and growing, electrifying, for example, Africa. But you need to do it while being green, which is not something that we did. So these are competing challenges that are very difficult, and this is exactly what the platform that I was talking about before, the effect, is aiming to do, is to create a forum and a framework to help extractive economies decarbonize without economic disastrous ramifications. So this is how we need to have the dialogue and make sure that that the local challenges they don't contradict the global ones. The example that I mentioned, I won't repeat for the sake of time, is the Kovacs. You had the global concern of everyone was fending for themselves, but the responsibility of the international community coming together to solve a global crisis. And just one thing regarding Stefan's question, the 3 countries that you mentioned that are going to have now and are going to be leading the G20, I just want to add they're all members of the Development Center. So we can take the discussion very much there.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to pick up the one question to each speaker. You can just make your answer very shortly. The first one to Stefan. In the context of decreasing political momentum for providing aid, what is the effective way that you suggest to convince the public opinion to increase the portion of ODA? And then second question to Grace. For many countries, South-South cooperation tend to focus on one-off study tours, so very like a temporary and a short kind of program, rather than long-term perspective. So how can we make South-South cooperation more systematic and long-term from your own expert perspective? That's the second question to you. And the last question to Laga. So I'm going to read this, it's too long. So the point is, how do we see the future of multi-stakeholder cooperation? Because the nationalism and isolation-based approach by the leading countries. So what is the future plan for the multi-stakeholder partnership in your view? Okay, so Stefan, maybe 1 minute?
Thank you. So public opinion, how to convince the public about development cooperation. My response would be, in the past, our typical way how we were responding to this was we have 2 sets of motivations. One set is altruism, so humanitarian motivation. So this is important for those countries. We are not looking at our own interests. And the second is selfish interest, economic interest, security interest, etc. In a way, this is still true, but what I would rather emphasize is looking at all global challenges, pandemic, security, economic challenges. Development cooperation is always playing a very important role for the provision of global public goods. And all those topics like climate change, how to deal with it, pandemic, you can take all of them, migration. Those are really global public goods, sometimes global public bets, where development cooperation is one tool, one approach. And can we really afford to say we are not using those resources to try to manage those crisis situations? I doubt. So this is something what is sometimes a bit, difficult to explain, but this is probably the most important interest we have in development. So in this regard, I think we have a good justification, but we need to rephrase it a bit from the past. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And secondly, I'm going to invite Grace for 1 minute to answer your question.
Thank you very much for the question. I think I have nothing against study tours. Sometimes a study tour can be inspirational, and if a study tour can already resolve your problem, I don't think you need further actions. But I do think South-South cooperation is flexible, and it has small and beautiful projects. It has big and powerful schemes and programs. So both are necessary. And how to make South-South cooperation altogether has more systematic approach and more longer-term lasting impact. I think we should start from strategic planning. And that is why in the national development planning for the SDGs, South-South and triangular cooperation as one modality supporting the implementation of SDGs should be considered in the planning process already. And there is some new movements. For example, the resolution of General Assembly on South-South cooperation has already included an ask for integrating South-South and triangular cooperation into UN Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks with developing countries as appropriate. So our office is developing guidance to support that. And another example is the VNR, the Voluntary National Review of Sustainable Development Goals, that is presented as high-level committee, high-level political forum at the UN by countries. And we are also supporting countries to integrating South-South cooperation into VNR, Voluntary National Reviews. And that is a process, not just the report itself, the process of planning, multi-stakeholder engagement and implementation, monitoring and reporting. So that way, I think no matter it's small and beautiful project or big and powerful project, if it's planned strategically from the beginning and in a systematic approach, it will achieve the impact.
All right, thank you so much. And then lastly, Vaga, for 1 minute.
Thank you. 1 minute for that question. I'll try to be very, very clear. We don't have a choice. We have, I think Stefan said, we need cooperation, but we have little capacity, and that's the situation now. But the situation is also very clear. The world is too complex for anyone to do it alone. The world is in dire challenges, again, for example, the climate, that we cannot solve it country by country. We need to do it together. And I think, and I agree with Stefan when you said that would we be able to reach the agreements that we reached in 2015? Probably not, unless we have to. And we find that, you know, I'm an optimist. I'm like Madeleine Albright. I'm an optimist who worried too much. And I think when we have crisis after crisis, we have to also make sure to remember that we should never let a good crisis go by without utilizing it and changing. And that's, again, innovation. When we don't have a choice, we do a lot of things. We are now having hybrid and virtual events all over the world, and that we never envisioned, and it was not possible. And everything that we have taken out of COVID, the positive things. So we need to be innovative and make sure that the multilateral system withstands this challenge and grows stronger.
All right, so I think this time's up, and then we start with the very important, the macroscopic, the agenda, the dynamics of the emerging donors, and also the, some crisis, multiple crises, and then the ways ahead. So actually we need 1 week to discuss all things, but we just discussed like less than 2 hours. So sorry about it to all speakers. I mean, it's not enough time. So anyway, so thank you for the heated discussion and the good question, good presentation, and also the grace you now in New York, so your attendance and presentation is more valid. So thank you so much for everyone. And then I think that you guys like getting hungry, so I must say, bon appetit. So thank you for the second session.
So that concludes session 2 of the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. And we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to our eloquent speakers and moderators once again. Thank you very much.